Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, one of the more loved Pokemon spin-off games made. The only game from the series that I ever owned was Red Rescue Team, and I never finished it. There was always something about the game that annoyed me, and I aim to see if the remake fixes it or not. Mystery Dungeon takes a ton of elements from the battle mechanics of the main series. It still retains the rock, paper, scissors formula of type advantages and allows Pokemon to learn 4 moves. Moves can be leveled up through repeated use. Leveling up moves increases their power and accuracy, and trust me, you're gonna want to make it easier to hit enemies. You can also link moves, allowing you to use 2 moves at once, and honestly, I never used this feature besides testing it out in the beginning. Linking moves causes both moves to lose PP, and PP management is crucial for trekking through the larger dungeons in the game. Linking moves is done through either an item called the Link Box, or can be done in Pokemon Square. Pokemon Square is the main hub where you can buy items and accept rescue requests. You can also store money at the Persian Bank, which prevents the player from losing money in case they faint in a dungeon. This also applies to any item you are carrying in your bag, so of course, there's an item storage as well. The best business in Pokemon Square is the Makuhita Dojo. By completing side quests, you can obtain dojo tickets ranging from bronze, silver, and gold. Using these tickets will put a Pokemon of your choice in a 1-floor dungeon and significantly increase the amount of experience gained when defeating a Pokemon. This is an amazing feature. One of my biggest grievances with the original was how long it took to level up your team. Now through side quests and the dojo, I was able to pretty much use any Pokemon that I recruited, and it allowed for more diversity within my team. Granted, I ended up defaulting to a few Pokemon that I knew could get the job done, like my trusty Gligar here, but this feature has seen a wonderful improvement. To recruit more members of your team, you will need to complete the various side quests offered and explore the required dungeon of the mission. The main goal of the game is to rescue Pokemon, if you couldn't tell from the title, from the natural disasters occurring across the land. Most of these side quests range from finding a lost Pokemon to finding lost items or reuniting Pokemon with their friends. There's an overabundance of missions given to the players, so you'll never not have a rescue to go on. Completing these rescues will reward your team with points to level up your team's ranking. Ranking up a team has many benefits, like being able to recruit more teammates, more item space in your adventure bag, and more jobs to accept. While the rewards are nice, the side quests show the biggest flaw with the game. However, I use the word flaw loosely here. All of the dungeons you explore are randomly generated with pre-designed rooms and pathways. None of them have any discernible differences from one another besides aesthetics. Sure, some of the tiles can only be stepped on if you're a certain type of Pokemon, but that doesn't really change it up. Having pretty much every dungeon designed the same way makes the pace of Mystery Dungeon drag considerably after long play sessions, or when a dungeon has too many floors to go through. Sky Tower, Magma Cavern, and any of the post-game dungeons are the worst offenders of this. These dungeons can go from 25 to 40 floors, and it definitely overstays their welcome. The dungeons mentioned are later in the game, so it makes sense that they're longer, but at certain points, it feels like it never ends. I started to get frustrated and let out a big sigh after I realized I'm not at the end of a dungeon. What doesn't help is the surprise factor of all these dungeons with tiles that can hurt your team. These tiles can randomly pop up in any room and inflict stat debuffs, deal excessive damage, or cause status conditions. I don't really understand the point to any of these when all they do is either halt your progression or minorly inconvenience the player. I don't even think this counts as a real obstacle, to be honest. Instead of having these random design elements, it would have been great to have well thought out dungeons with actual obstacles. We get to travel through freaking volcanoes and underwater caves, for crying out loud. They could easily add maybe gusts of wind when in the Sky Tower to travel to different areas in the floors, lava that can only be extinguished by certain Pokemon, or in Thunderwave Cave, use an electric Pokemon to open up locked doors or solve puzzles. This change would make recruiting Pokemon for your rescue team more meaningful. Since it's up to chance whether you recruit a Pokemon or not, maybe change up the story and recruit new teammates as you progress through the story. It could be simple, like Diglett needs help rescuing his friend that's stuck and wants to help you out. This could also allow for random dungeons to be implemented in side quests and include obstacles from any story dungeons. Plus, you would already have the required Pokemon to tackle any obstacle in your way because you already recruited them. Obviously, since this is a remake, it's not the end of the world. I say this as more of an idea to push the series forward. Mystery Dungeon was originally made for the Nintendo DS and the Game Boy Advance. which is why I said I use the word flaw loosely. Handheld games are meant to be played in short bursts, and if you do that, the repetitive randomly designed dungeons don't stick out as much. However, we are working with a home console here. When I sit down to play my Nintendo Switch, it's usually for more than 1 hour and not for a quick 30 minutes of gameplay. I do want to give praise to a few minor gameplay tweaks that improve the overall quality of the game, and that comes in the form of combat. Like the original, stat buffs, status conditions, and items all matter a lot more than in the main series. Using all of these tools along with the placement of your Pokemon on the map leads to an extra layer of strategy. Some attacks will hit far away while others can only land if you're adjacent to an enemy. However, this mainly applies to boss battles because the random Pokemon you fight won't cause any serious issues. Bosses can do incredible damage to your team if you're not prepared enough for it. Even with team members that have a disadvantage against a particular boss, you can easily mitigate it with items. You could chuck items that deal damage to enemies, use orbs to give stat buffs, or inflict status conditions. Abusing these items can sometimes make a boss an absolute joke. Rayquaza was never able to land an attack on my team at one point. Even though bosses are more challenging than normal enemies, I still say the game is pretty easy since items can break the game. But at the same time, the difficulty can change depending on how well you have prepared. It also doesn't help that Pokemon can have 2 abilities now. They normally only have 1, but the additional ability is called Rare Qualities. These rare qualities range from automatically restoring PP if a move runs out, powering up moves after repeated use, stat buffs after getting hit, or giving stat debuffs to Pokemon after taking damage. It's nice this is added to the game, but it does make it easier to deal with certain threats. However, there is one particular rare quality that eliminates one of the most annoying aspects about the original, and it's called Squad Up. This quality makes it way easier to recruit new teammates for rescues. From what I remember from playing Red Rescue Team, it was a nightmare trying to recruit a specific Pokemon. By the time I made it to the end of a dungeon in the remake, I pretty much had the maximum number of Pokemon I could recruit. I mentioned briefly about the postgame earlier, and well, I wouldn't say it's good, but I definitely wouldn't say it's bad either. New dungeons are unlocked for you to explore, but they're all still randomly generated. One of them lasts for 99 floors. Yeah, no thanks. You can also recruit any new boss you face along with any previous ones. This includes pretty much any legendary before Generation 4. One feature that always bugged me about Mystery Dungeon was the fact you cannot evolve your Pokemon until the post-game. The reason they give you during the main game is that the world was out of balance, but I call BS. Honestly, it's not really worth doing any of the post-game. As stated already, you pretty much do the same thing as the main game. I mean, yeah, some of the bosses do change things up, like when Groudon uses his primal form, but I already faced him before. Sure, it's more challenging, which is nice, but the repetitive nature of the game really doesn't make me want to play the post-game. For those who have stuck with the series through the 3DS days, you might notice a change in art direction. The look of this game ain't no Super Mystery Dungeon, that's for sure. The art direction is more stylized this time around instead of the generic looking 3D models. This look breathes new life into Pokemon Square and honestly makes it feel more like a town compared to the original. Move animations have been upgraded and look decent. Some moves look very similar between one another, like Flamethrower and Flame Burst, or Water Gun and Hydro Pump. The signature moves for bosses look great, like Rayquaza's Hyper Beam or Groudon's Precipice Blades. With all that being said, dungeons are still not interesting to look at. Sure, there is some variation between them all, but Magma Caverns doesn't do too much to differentiate itself from Mount Blaze until you go further into the dungeon. There's also something about the character models in dungeons that just don't mesh well for me. The character models blend into the environments depending on the dungeon you're traveling through. Good music would definitely help out when exploring the similar looking dungeons, but I gotta be honest, the music is just not that memorable. The only themes that I can recall off the top of my head are the main theme, Pokemon Square, and your rescue team base. Also, the soundtrack is very faithful to the original. It all sounds like it comes straight from the GBA version of the game, except it's higher quality. I get the reasoning behind it, but it kinda comes across as lazy to me. At least the story cutscenes were given more visual flair. It's mainly when encountering a boss for the first time. Extra effects are added and definitely gives them more of an intimidating presence than sprites jumping up and down ever could. The plot is very generic. It doesn't hold my interest for too long. You're a human who turned into a Pokemon in order to stop an asteroid from crashing into the Earth. There's definitely more to the story and a ton of characters, But it's not interesting at all. Characters don't have that much development either. For example, you meet the strongest rescue team in the world, but not given many details about the team members and the feats they've accomplished. Even your partner Pokemon doesn't develop into anything worthwhile besides, I want to save Pokemon! I can't even name a character trait from any of the townsfolk walking around Pokemon Square. Of course, a more expansive story is harder to do on a handheld, but there were plenty of RPGs back in the day that had more interesting stories and characters than this. Even the main series had memorable characters like rivals and champions. There might be some more to it in the post-game, but I already expressed why I can't be bothered to do most of it. While the main story is bare, the game as a whole definitely isn't terrible, and as a remake I say it's pretty decent. You can't really solve the repetitive nature of the game or the simple story without changing everything. I mean, unless you're really itching to play this game again and you bought it before, I say your money is better left being spent somewhere else. But what do I know? I'm just some random guy on the internet who decided to review Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX. If you want to see more game reviews, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, and I'll see you next time.